Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are gonna build this model right here. This is a 1:72 scale model of a Churchill Mark III from Dragon. Once I saw this model in a stock in my local shop, I couldn't resist buying it because I love how Churchills look and I've been wanting to make a model of it for quite a while but didn't really want to do the artillery kit. So let's build this one today. The box contains quite a few sprues, not too many. There is no photo edge and there are rubber tracks. I actually got lucky and for some reason got two sets of rubber tracks, which isn't supposed to happen. I've never seen anyone else have this, so I consider myself pretty lucky with this kit. Anyway, let's get right into building it. The instructions have only a few steps and they seem quite straightforward. There are some mistakes though, mainly in the wheel parts, but you can figure it out yourself, how the stuff is supposed to go together. I start snipping out the parts out of the sprues using my sharp side cutters. As you can see, there is quite a lot of wheels on this tank and I'm really happy that Dragon decided to make them into one big mold. This makes stuff way easier, and this is the only reason that I find rubber tracks acceptable, because I, as a lot of other modelers, quite hate rubber tracks because of how much force and strain they put on the running gear. However, here it's, you know, acceptable because the running gear is very solid and they are wrapped basically around the entire side of the tank instead of being wrapped around wheels that are on thin swing arms. Once this is glued together, I can move on to the sprockets. Now these are wrongly marked in the instructions, and the instructions basically tell you to glue wrong parts together, but you can basically figure it out, you just switch them. I really like how Churchills look with cut off front mudguards. So I simply cut them off with the sharp side cutters, and then I refine the cut with my hobby knife so it looks a little more realistic and not as messy as the side cutters left it. I also used the hobby knife to thin the mudguard on the edge, which creates this effect of the mudguard being thinner than it actually is. Anyway, once the model was assembled, it was pretty easy, just a bunch of tiny little parts. Most details were molded on. I decided to start adding some additional details that would make the model cooler. Now, one of them is exactly why I was happy that I actually got two sets of tracks. I wanted to make some additional armor for the tank, because this is a thing that would often happen on real tanks. I saw pictures of Churchills having spare tracks from Shermans, from Tigers, from Panzers, but most importantly, usually from Churchill itself. So I used these spare tracks for this purpose by cutting them off, cutting them into little pieces and putting them wherever the reference showed them. Since they are rubber, I can also create realistic sort of folds in them. You know, when they are put onto the turret, the top track will sit on the top of the turret and it'll hang downwards on the front, which is, you know, a cool little detail that I can do with the rubber tracks. Then I decided to do some stowage. Now, best stowage, you will hear this from a lot of modelers, is when it's a combination of soft and hard stowage. Now here you can see how it looks like when I don't have my glasses on, because I don't know how phones work and I can't get my phone to focus properly. Anyway, I use green stuff putty. This is a two-piece putty that you have to cut off, mix it together until it's green, then you can use it to sculpt little bags or something like that. And this is what I started to do here. I started to sculpt little tarps and little bags full of fingerprints because I couldn't find any latex gloves. Anyway, it's pretty easy to sculpt stowage with these. Of course, you need some practice, and this is the first time I was doing it, so I had no practice whatsoever. But what I did was I first made sure I had my fingers wet, because this putty sticks insanely well to stuff that you need it to stick to, but it doesn't stick to stuff that it doesn't stick to. It struggles to stick to some stuff, but it sticks to your fingers, so I recommend having your fingers wet. Nachi, for example, had them uses baby powder, but as you can see, I just smooshed the putty into small little tarps that I then either rolled in to make like those rolled in tarps, or I use it here to make a normal tarp folded over the tank, and then I used some boxes that I had from older kits to make hard stowage as well. And with this, the kit was built and it was time to start painting. To start the blackening process, I use a Mecha Black primer from Viejo diluted with a ordinary acrylic thinner. This one is from AK. In blackening process basically means that I prime the model in a black color. Primer can be any color that you buy. I prefer black because it helps create fake shadows that I then cover over with paint regardless, and they are invisible. But this paint is sorta rough, which allows the other paints to stick onto. So I start spraying the entire model with this paint, making sure I cover literally everything, because even the blindest person ever could notice a brightly grey plastic from underneath all of this black. And we don't want this because it would break the illusion, so I spray literally everything with this. I also spray the primer onto the rubber tracks because apart from the rubber tracks breaking suspensions, from my experience, they also don't hold paint really well, and this is a paint made to hold other paint, so I decided to spray them with the primer. Also, it would be kind of weird if I just didn't, like, I already have it in my airbrush, so Anyway, I started spraying the model with a British dark olive green from AK. I diluted it again with the acrylic thinner because this is a acrylic paint. I started spraying the entire model, or well, everything that I wanted, you know, in this color. I didn't want to do any multicolored paint camouflage because from what I know, I mean, there was one this Churchill could have that was multicolored, but I didn't really like it. And there are few British multicolored camouflages that I would love to do, but I couldn't do them on this Churchill because I didn't want to. I was too lazy at the time. Anyway, once this base coat was painted, it was time for some post shading. Now, post shading is one of my favorite methods because it allows the model to look a little more realistic, a little more interesting. Now, if you don't know what post shading is, it's basically a technique that focuses on highlighting all the highlighted areas on a vehicle with a lighter color from the base coat color that you used. Now, here you can see me, I only put a little drop of buff into the paint, and I started highlighting basically everything. Now, my technique of highlighting, or well, how I do it, is that I highlight middle of panels when it comes to vertical parts of the tank. So, you know, if you have a hatch, I highlight more towards the middle, and I leave the edges darker, which visually makes it stand out. When it's a vertical, or well, when it's a vertical part of the tank, I highlight towards the upper parts so it looks like it's getting sun shined on from the top. Now, as you can see here, I use another even lighter color, and here you can see me use even lighter color. This is basically done to make even more and more highlighted parts, because the more contrast you get into your model, the more visible it'll be at the end. Because if you've maybe seen some other 70-second scale kits, you might have realized that since they are smaller, they appear darker than they are. So this post shading really makes them look lighter, more three-dimensional, and helps with other parts like washes. Anyway, for the additional tracks, I decided to base coat them in a leather brown. Now, you might be asking, Peter, why leather brown? There are specifically rusty brown colors. I just really like this mid-tone of brown, where it's not too dark, not too light either, and it's a good base coat that I can then apply other rust effects onto. So this is why I paint all the tracks in a leather brown. It's also diluted so it doesn't do 100% coverage, which also helps it make look a bit more rusty. From my 6 years of modeling, I've never learned how to paint toe hooks properly, and I always avoided them, but here they are molded on, so I base coated them in a light gray color, and I will later on do rust effects on them as well. The boxes on the back also got a leather brown base coat, because as I said, I really like the shade of the brown. No wait, this is chocolate. I also used this paint on some of the bags and on the tarps, because I thought it would make it look more diverse and interesting. I even made a black tarp, which I don't think were used in the Second World War, but then again, were these actually issued to the crews? The very similar highlighting method is used here, however it's ever so slightly different because I painted with a brush. I dilute the color and I use a lighter color on the parts that I would think that are highlighted. I really don't have any life hack in my mind that would help you decide what would be highlighted, what wouldn't be. I just paint what I think would be highlighted on a bag like this. So usually edges and top, and I also paint with lighter and lighter color continuously. I use buff to lighten these colors, because if you use buff on a color, it'll lighten it, but it'll still keep its shade, while if you use white, it'll make it more desaturated. On the boxes, I basically dry brushed them, sorta, with buff as well, or well, deck 10. It wasn't a dry brush, I just made a bunch of small streaks that created wood texture. Afterwards it was time for some washes. This is an opposite of highlighting. This basically makes all of the crevices and all of the tiny little details pop more, because it makes their outline dark. I use enamel washes that require enamel thinner to blend them, and enamel thinner destroys paint, so I had to varnish the model beforehand, but I then started just blending around the wash, and while I was blending it, it was suddenly done, and it was time to start some scratching on the model. Now I decided to do double layer scratches. Now there are different ways how to do double layer scratches. I just decided to do the typical one where you scratch with a lighter color and then you scratch with a rusty color. This isn't particularly realistic, and now that I didn't do it on some other models, I noticed how unrealistic it looks, but it makes the model look really sharp and it looks really cool. So as you can see here, I used a really light green color to do some outside chips, and then inside of those chips I started using dark rust from Vallejo Panzer Aces range to create rusty spots, and I really like how it looks. But you'll see in my future videos that I did some better techniques, in my opinion. I used a light rust diluted acrylic color on the tracks. I basically just stippled it on. This created a nice rusty effect. With the same diluted rusty acrylic, I then also used it on the additional track armor, and I went over the toe hooks with it, and it actually made the toe hooks look pretty red, so I'm pretty happy with how it looks. Anyway, it was time for some rust trick wash. This is used to make the little chips more blended with their surroundings, because as you can see they do pop up quite a lot, and I think it's a bit too much to the eye, so I put the rust trick wash around the biggest ones of them, and then I blend it around to make it look a little more realistic. It looks pretty good in my opinion. Of course, I can't have a World War I style suspension and not make it completely muddy, so I started making it completely muddy. I used Vallejo acrylic paste to put everywhere I would expect mud to get. Now there are a lot of pictures of these tanks, pretty muddy. Here you can see me adding mud to the top, underneath the mudguard. I think this is a really cool detail that I noticed in photos. Now, since this is acrylic, it just nicely dries in the air pretty quickly. Once it's dry, I started pre-dusting, because I think the mud looked pretty good, but a little out of place, so the pre-dusting should tie everything a little together. The pre-dusting mixture is buff with some gray to make it desaturated, because desaturated dust looks pretty cool. I apply it basically everywhere I would expect dust to get, so it's not necessarily where I put mud. Mud is where I would expect mud to get, but this is where I would expect dust to get. So even underneath the thread ring and on the tracks, on the sides, I made some dust streaks, but I did that later on. This is just a basic layer that will help me decide what to do next. And what I did next was use a dust oil brusher. Again, I diluted it with an enamel thinner, since it's a oil paint. I applied it sort of as a wash to the areas where I applied the 3D texture. Since I diluted it, it didn't really need any blending, but where it did need blending, I blended it, because when it needs blending, you need to blend it because it'll leave tide marks. And here you can see me adding it on the bottom of the, underneath the turret, around the turret ring, because that's where you would get a lot of dust. And also on the bottom, because you always have to paint your bottoms. And then I also did some dust streaks. This is basically using a little less diluted oil brusher on the side, and then coming in with a bigger, wider brush dipped into the enamel thinner, and dragging it downwards to create some dust streaks. Now here you could think that it's done because it looks pretty great, but I moved forward and I added some sloppy, not wet mud, but muddier mud on the muddy parts of the muddy tank. I added this using a ordinary, well, it's also an oil brusher. This time it's called Earth. So I added it around the texture specifically, and also did some streaks with it. And once this was all done, I considered the model done and ready for a spinny bit. So how would I rate this model? First of all, the kit, 7 to 8 out of 10. Now it's definitely the best Churchill in 72nd scale, because the Italia one doesn't count, and neither does the 1998 Hasegawa one. I would really wish that they did a Churchill Mark 7, because I like that one the most visually, but I think they did and they stopped. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, the kit is 7 out of 10. It's got really nice detail, but no photo edge, even for the grills. There was quite a lot of flash, and the rubber tracks are still quite annoying, even though these are the best rubber tracks just because of how simple the suspension is. Otherwise, I'm really happy with the weathering. I think this is the best weathering I've ever done, but of course this is a thing for you guys to judge. So I would like to hear all of your guys' opinions in the comments. We are getting really close to 800 and therefore to 1k subscribers. So I would really like to ask you to maybe subscribe if you like this video, give me a like, send this video to your friend that likes Churchills and is a Tiabu, for example, and just generally let me know what you think down in the comments. So again, thank you a lot for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video with some Wunderwaffe.